Yep.
There we go.
So far, Kathy and Jeannie, right?
Yes.
Who else is here? Were either of you guys at the other one that I did?
I was.
Okay.
I was not.
Okay. I just kind of usually will like to just tell a little bit of who I am, but I wasn't going to go through all that if everybody heard that before. But basically, I adopted a daughter. My name's Jennie. Adopted a daughter who ended up being diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder. So we went through about 10 years of chaos before we figured out what was going on and how to help her. And she's come a long, long way. So it's become a passion of mine to reach out and try to help other families who are going through some of these things. Because if we can understand what our kids are going through, then we can help them. But for so many years, we just don't know what she needs. And so we weren't able to help. So that's like a really short version of who I am. She's almost 20 now, and is a contributing member of society. So yay! Calling that a win.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's a sweetie now. So Sandy and I were talking about some different ideas, some different subjects that might come up with Rise Up and being on the team with that, and just having kids that are trauma affected. They're much quicker to escalate. And so one of our great privileges is to be able to be there with them during those kinds of situations and help basically de-escalate situations, that anything that we can. But so as we kind of talk tonight about this topic, our goal, I just kind of wanted to just back up for a minute and really say our goal here in talking about these things isn't just to calm a kid down. Our goal is to come alongside our kids, to support them, to so they feel heard, so they feel that they're regaining some sense of control, but ultimately to help teach them how to regulate themselves. And so we're co-regulators with them through these things. So as we kind of talk through just this process of why our kids escalate so quickly and how can we help them to bring that back down, none of this is earth-shattering new discoveries. This is all, if you've had a child, a spouse, or a peer that you work with, a coworker, then a lot of these things are just common sense relationship things. But it's important as a team to come together to prioritize kind of what our approach is going to be, and to keep these things fresh on our minds. We have to kind of keep talking about them. I don't know about you, but I'm classic. I'm an expert at coming up with a great comeback 3 hours too late. You know, that's what I should have said. You know, it finally occurs to you a little bit later, or for me, sometimes hours later. So talking about these things and just being more aware of them and keeping them on the forefront of our minds helps us in those situations to do the things that our kids need to feel heard and to calm down, and to be able to work through their anxiety. So I am going to share my screen. Where did it go? Share screen, there it is. Okay, let's just do it this way. All right, can you all see my screen? Okay. I'm just using some of the material from a company called CPI, which Crisis Prevention Intervention. They kind of specialize in training companies to do this sort of thing where they're really trying to de-escalate situations. And they've got their material is, again, it's very basic stuff. It seems like, well, this is kind of common sense to a lot of us, especially when we've been in any kind of situation where somebody maybe can get a little irrationally upset. We have to do these things, but they're really good at kind of breaking them down and giving us kind of the opportunity to just talk about them and identify them so we can recognize them. Our kids have been through trauma where they don't feel like they have control. And going through hard times is hard. But when you go through hard times and you have no say, you have no control over what's happening to you, where you're going, how it's going to be solved, who's listening to you, what they're doing for you, all those things, when you don't have control over them, they are much more intense. They feel much more intense to us. Even if somebody is really looking out for you, if you don't feel like you have any say in it. I don't know if any of you ever ride in a car with a teenager, but if you're not in control of the car, you know, you're gripping the dashboard and you're pushing your feet up on the floorboard. It's that feeling of not being in control, even if they're not really driving crazy, but without that sense of control, it raises our anxiety, right? So when we feel like someone isn't listening, if we're upset and someone isn't listening, what do you guys feel like are ways that we try to get people to listen? Are y'all up for an interactive, let's talk kind of session?
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's kind of just hash that out. If you're upset and people aren't listening, they don't get it, what kind of things do we do to get people to hear us?
Yell.
Yeah.
Turn up the volume. Yes, turn up the volume.
Yeah.
Repeating
other-
the same thing.
What?
Keep repeating.
Yeah, keep repeating.
Get angry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like our facial expressions change, our nonverbal expressions. My family teases me because if I can't move my hands, I can't talk. So obviously that's an issue for me. So if I'm upset, my hands, I get more drastic, I get more dramatic with my hands. They start wailing all over the place, and I really need that 6 feet of social distance at that point anyway. Our cadence, our tone, we could really, you know, tense up. All those things are just ways for us to say, I need you to hear me. I need you to listen. So when we see these kinds of anxious behaviors in our kids, it's really a window into their state of mind. But often it comes in a way that pushes our buttons, right? It can sound disrespectful. It can cause more chaos. It can dysregulate everyone else around us, and those things can really frustrate us. So the first and foremost thing that we always say is be calm, stay in control of yourself. But remembering that these behaviors, they're not personal. They're anxious behaviors. And when we kind of step back out of a situation and look at these behaviors, we can identify that we do the same things when we're upset. We might just not get there quite as quickly, but these are all behaviors that we do just to get people to listen. And isn't that what we all want to be heard, right? So, so as we're talking about recognizing and being able to identify what's going on with our kids and being able to appropriately respond, CPI has broken it down into kind of levels. So the first one really being anxiety is that we notice these kinds of changes in their behavior. Often it's increased breathing. It can also be a movement, right? So, you know, you might notice somebody really starting to shake their leg. those kinds of behaviors. So there can be physical behaviors. It can also be audible things that we hear, but being able to recognize that anxiety and the body communicates anxiety, even if they don't say it with their words. Sometimes even pupils dilate when a person is fearful. Their breathing might pick up. You know, if you think about getting nervous going on stage, that's anxiety, right? So have a hard time catching their breath. A lot of things like that. Do you guys, are there other behaviors that you guys can think of that I've not identified as far as what do you think is anxious behavior? What do you recognize in someone when you see their anxiety level is increasing?
Some people just shut down when they get anxious.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, they withdraw. I know my daughter gets a stomach ache. It's not exactly something you can see, but she'll tell you pretty quickly. Anything else?
There's also violence sometimes attached to it.
Yeah, and they're gonna kind of put that in the next level. A lot of the objective here is for us to be able to identify it before it gets to that. We do have kids, I think, that do kind of jump right to that, and if we can identify it's happening. I mean, I remember just as a mom with my kids, I could see when a temper tantrum was coming, and I finally began to learn how to intervene and stop it. But sometimes you see the signs, you know that it's coming. Well, we're going to break this down a little bit more, but our approach when we see someone being anxious and just exhibiting those behaviors is support. So our mindset is they need my support. They need help with regulating. They need to be heard. They need they need my involvement. So I think the old time attitude of, well, just ignore them. If they're going to have a temper tantrum, we're just going to ignore it. But our kids need to be heard. They don't have control over a lot of crappy stuff in their life. And so we want to do the opposite. We want to engage with them and be supportive of them. The next level that we'll kind of break down a little bit is a defensive mindset. It's a defensive posture where logic starts to decrease, where we can say, this isn't making any sense. You're just making it worse. Those kinds of thoughts that we have, because the amygdala in the brain is taking over, the fear is taking over, the anxiety is overriding logical decisions about language and consequences and those kinds of things. So we're going to talk a little bit about just how to really be directive in that. We want to step into it with our kids. We want to take control of situations. They want control because in the short term, it makes them feel safer. But in the long term, they need you to be in control because that's actually what's going to build trust for them and help them to feel safe. So we'll break that down in a little bit. The acting out person, this is where, and Sandy and Joe, I'll kind of let you guys, speak into this as much as you want. I'm not going to get into, obviously, CPI physically restraining a person is an absolute last resort that I would say it's beyond last resort. So especially when you guys physically are back in a classroom with these kids in this situation, if you get to that point of an acting out person where they're actually doing anything that's threatening, there are steps that we can take. So we'll talk about some of those as far as getting out of their way, removing other people from being in danger, and just getting the help. But we're not going to go into actual restraint for kids because that's something that requires some legal protection on rise-ups end. And then of course, tension reduction afterwards. So after our kids have had some sort of anxious blow up, and again, it may not be physical, but they can have, you know, meltdowns, what we call temper tantrums, we call screamers, you know, we can call them all kinds of things. But afterwards, it's almost like the calm after a storm, where our kids are more open to some supportive response. This is where I think it's tempting to sometimes shame a kid into what they've done, you know, or to, well, see, you know, enforcing consequences. And yet, what a fabulous opportunity when they've emptied themselves out of some of this anxiety to be able to fill them back up with love and support. So right after these situations, if we can be much in control of our emotions to deal with our stuff later, whether that pushed our buttons or if they insulted us or whatever we've got going on, that's our issue that we can deal with later. But in that moment, it's a fabulous opportunity to engage with them. So we're going to talk about some of the things that you can do to establish that rapport back with them, where they feel accepted, they feel loved, they feel like you're there to help them. And we really can, in those situations, help them not only reestablish a relationship and make things right, but also be able to think back on what's happened so they can say, I wish I had done this. Well, not I wish, but realizing what they could have done, which obviously will help them, equip them in the future for the next time they feel the anxiety, they feel like they haven't been heard, and so on and so on. So just kind of, we'll break it down a little bit with anxiety. We talked some about when we see that the changes in their behavior, breathing, physical motion, facial expressions, tones, all those things. We really need to be tuned into our kids and be listening for those things, and respond with support. So a non-judgmental approach. Our kids tend to be attracted and drawn to chaos. It may seem like they're sabotaging a good thing, but if they feel that support, if they feel the non-judgmental, I'm not going to judge you by your behavior. I'm going to just care about you as a person and support you. A lot of times that is all they need. And a lot of times we just need to be heard. So some things to be aware of is to respect their personal space. We don't want to get in their face. We don't want to, for them to feel like we're threatening them at all, ever. So of course, COVID has kind of made us a lot more aware of personal space anyway, but it's just it's part of just treating a person with respect, and even a child or a teen or a tween as well, to just, we don't enter their space, we don't enter people's space without permission or without an established relationship already. This is really important also, not only for respecting their space, but also, well, we'll get into that in a minute. Okay, so responsive, our response back to them. So we need to be aware of our own physical reactions that we're communicating, our nonverbal things that we're communicating. So I think I said this last time where we were trying to work with my daughter, and one of the things that we had learned was to have soft eyes so that we're not like glaring. And my daughter at age 11 was bright enough to say, Mom, you're using your soft eyes, but you're gritting your teeth. So she was clued in that I wasn't necessarily expressing all of the support that I was hoping to. Couldn't fake it enough. She could see through that. So we need to be aware of our own responses. Are we, snapping at them because we're getting irritated with them? Are we maintaining our calm and our cool? So nonverbal messages are really important to be aware of. I'm going to kind of fly through some of this, as we've covered some of it. This is I think a really helpful, just a really practical, and it seems really simple, right? But the supportive stance is something that is really helpful for several reasons. First of all, like I said, just respecting a person's personal space. Our kids often feel threatened. They don't feel safe. A supportive stance where we actually have our body positioned at an angle and we have our legs directly under our shoulders. And so we tend to be a little bit more, when we're in this stance, where we're not directly directly facing someone, but it's a little bit of it's just a little bit of an angle. And this helps us kind of be aware of personal space. I do feel like personal space has really changed in 2020. So take that for what it is, but it's a non-threatening position where we're not directly hovering over somebody. And it also is safe. It's safe for us, because if a child ever were to get to the acting out stage, which we hope will never happen, but you're in a position where you are a much more stable, you've got a better stance to be able to protect yourself. So that supportive stance is something to be aware of as you're interacting with them. Our paraverbal communication, so our vocal parts of speech, this is everything except the actual words you say. So this is when someone is anxious, when someone is upset. Do you ever notice how you change your voice to, that almost kind of trying to mirror back their emotions, which is a part of empathetic listening, where we are communicating that we are hearing them. So we want to make sure their voice is not getting like this, and we're not getting louder, and that we are using the appropriate tones. So kids that we might get frustrated with, we might tend to want to, I just do not want to deal with you, and almost kind of talk in an unnatural cadence or tone. Those are all things that just kind of they pop out of us, and we think later, I shouldn't have done that. But at the time, they're kind of our instinct. So being really aware of our paraverbal communication too is helpful. So again, angry tones, loud volume, the fast cadence, those are things you're going to hear, you might hear from a student. So our response is to be calm and reassuring, make sure we're using appropriate volume, that we're not changing the way we talk to one student versus the way we talk to another. Because they can hear those things, they can pick up on those things. So we have to be really guarded with that. Okay, so as we kind of move into a defensive phase where our attempts at maintaining our cool and being supportive haven't seemed to help, and there's times where it's not your fault, and probably most times it's not your fault, you're really trying, but our kids don't feel like they're in control, and they don't feel heard. And so this is often where we get to where they're not making any sense, or they're pushing the boundaries, and obviously this is not going to end well, and yet they still keep pursuing that path. So this is where our kids really do need us to be in control. They need us to not flip our lids, because we're not dependable and respectable. When you think about a police officer who pulls you over, I don't know, I've been pulled over lots of times. Maybe y'all haven't, but I'm kind of have a heavy foot. So an officer is trained to stay in control, right? This is the speed you were going. I need to see your license and registration. And even if we get heated, they're trained to stay calm and use, have you ever noticed how they use a lot of the same verbiage? I mean, that's part of what they're trained to do, to be able to just step outside of their personal feelings and just interact with the policies and procedures that they've been trained to do. So if a police officer pulls you over and goes, "What were you thinking? Did you realize how fast you were going? Are you crazy? You could kill someone." I mean, I wouldn't respect that police officer very much if I saw them acting that way. Even if I'm acting that way, we want them to be calm and dependable. We want every police officer to act the same way. And I know that's been, you know, something that's definitely in the spotlight here in 2020. But so think of that when you're in that situation where they're flipping their lid. We have got to keep our lids on no matter how we feel on the inside, because we can actually make things worse, right? Even if we can't do anything to help this student, and we're trying everything we can, 2 + 2 = 4, but 2 + 3, if we change our responses to them, we can still change the outcome of the situation. It's not inevitable. So in this phase, one of the beginning kind of telltale signs really is questioning. We don't mind kids asking for information. That's a good thing. If they want to know more details about what you're teaching, that's great. Now, if they ask you the same thing 3 and 4 and 5 times, then that's an indicator that they're trying to get control of the situation. But the challenging questions are the ones that we need to really be more aware of, where this becomes a power struggle, and they're questioning whether you are worthy to be in the position that you're in. Because honestly, they would rather be the boss. They would like to be in the position that you're in. So it is going to feel sometimes like a power struggle. So when we get this kind of response and interaction from our kids, again, the biggest thing I think for us to just kind of keep in our mind is this is not personal. This isn't about me. This is about what they're going through. So trying to redirect at that point is pretty important and helpful. We don't want to get in a situation where we're being defensive and defending our position to them. So just kind of trying to think of an example of how this might play out. Does anybody have any experience with this where you've had a situation where you felt like you were being questioned as a challenge in a power struggle?
I can't think of a specific moment, but a couple of these ladies on the call with us tonight are homeschooling moms as well, and they're part of a co-op that I run. And I know that there's several times that even kids that don't have the trauma background necessarily like the kids that we're talking about do, they too sometimes will get to a point kind of like this and question over and over and try to be the, maybe not in charge, but the center of attention and gain all of the energy in the room. I know that's happened quite a few times. It has, at least to me, and I'm sure it has to them as well.
Yeah.
Well, I know I have with a couple of my foster kids, but it's been so long I can't remember a specific situation, particularly with Paige. Sandy knows Paige.
Yep.
She was a preteen when she was with us, and yeah, she was quite a challenge. But
I think I can remember when I would do group therapy, because I worked with kids. Sometimes, depending on the situation, you could use kind of a light sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to know the situation. If you can use some humor in the situation,
Yeah.
to make it a more lighter atmosphere.
Yeah. Playful, if you can approach anything with a playful tone, I agree. That is really powerful. Playful also communicates that you are okay, which helps with co-regulating, right? If they feel like you're not okay, then it's going to be harder for them to feel okay. But when we're playful, we're showing we don't have our guard up. We're not in hypervigilant mode. We're not, in protective or attack mode. So the playful, that's a great point. It really is a powerful redirect that you can do to, I think the biggest thing for this questioning phase where they're kind of challenging, they want to be the boss, is really to try to redirect, and we're going to move on to something else, and we're not going to give this the attention that they're trying to pull away, you know, to feed it. Cool. Well, let's see, get back on my screen here. For CPI, after the questioning phase, we've got really a refusal where we have students who get into that place where I'm not going to do what you are telling me to do. In this level, again, our primary objective here is to maintain control and to not lose our handle on the situation. So setting limits for our kids is really important. I think that in this situation, you know, Sandy, you guys, I'm sure have objectives here for how kids, what kind of behavior is tolerated in the classroom, and where do you draw the line? I don't know if you want to address that at all here.
Since we haven't been in person yet, I haven't formulated those concretely. So if you have some suggestions, that would be great, because most of what we've discussed or I've put on paper has been for Zoom classes right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, limits can include things like a time limit. So if obviously we've got these objectives for a class that we're teaching, and things are going to get off course some just anyway. Kids are going to tell stories. Somebody's going to, you know, say a poop joke, and everybody's got to take their time and laugh, and those kinds of things are fairly normal. But in your mind, to be able to set limits on how much actual material, how much time you spend covering that material might be one way. So, or, you know, obviously if it's been 2 or 3 minutes and we're completely still off track, then that might be another way that you can, you know, just as a teacher, especially, just to be aware that you're setting limits, that, and that these kids know upfront what your limits are. Okay. And we don't change them, right? You know, what we want to be dependable. We want to be trustworthy. So we want to stick to our word. And that's actually one of the big things that CPI is pretty adamant about, is that we communicate clearly what the limits are and the boundaries and the expectations, that they're reasonable. But the biggest thing is that, can we follow through on them? Because obviously we don't want to set limits that we can't enforce. And those are things I think, don't you think they just kind of come with as you begin to get into that situation and you get to know the kids? I do think these things, I think it's sometimes the Holy Spirit. I think it's our gut, it's our intuition, I can tell that this is not going like I thought it was going to go. And as we get a feel for our kids, but I think some of us, when we're new at this kind of thing, set a lot of boundaries that really are not enforceable, and consequences too. You know, at some point they're not regulated enough to participate in the class, and I know that is that is the opposite of what we want. We want them to stay engaged. We don't want isolation. We don't want to kick them out. We don't want rejection. We don't want them to have to go through that. But at the same time, we do have the rest of the kids in the class. And those are things that if they're preventing us from making this kind of progress with our other kids. And I will say too, I think one of the great things about Rise Up is you guys have this team, and you have these regular connections like this, where you can talk to each other and say, this is what's happening in the class, and I don't know how to kind of move on. I don't know how to get them to, you know, how do we get past this behavior that keeps happening and it keeps derailing, you know, the rest of the class. You guys can talk as a team about those things is really, really helpful. And even have somebody listen in to just be that brain or that perspective outside of, because our emotions really do get tied up in it, because sometimes they just drive me nuts, right? And then you have some that are so super sweet and easy, and we tend to be drawn to them, and we don't even realize we're doing it. So I think that's a really helpful, it's really helpful, just that accountability and that connection, and that you guys know what's going on with each other. The release, I think, is really helpful and important for our kids where maybe there is a situation, and I know you've got two adults with these, you'll have two adults with these groups where one can maybe pull them aside, and our objective is for them to be heard. And yeah, we want to stop the behavior, but the behavior is really their way of communicating. The behavior isn't the issue. It's whatever's causing the behavior, the fear underneath, the fear that's driving or that's producing the anxiety in them. Another big one is to remove their audience. And sometimes, you know, it just is a matter of pulling them out of the situation for a minute so they can let off some steam and, again, them step out of it. And that can help them co-regulate. As you guys get back into the classroom situation, it may be that you have a situation where you have to remove everyone else. And that is for more extreme situations. But as you know, an audience can often fuel whatever's going on. And so sometimes when we remove the audience, well, they've just lost their whole purpose in their endeavor. And so sometimes that can really solve a situation. But, you know, we can't solve these situations. We can't help them when they're in this place, in this defensive mode, and their logic and reason isn't working. So things like telling them to hush or telling them to calm down, those are rational, reasonable, verbal commands. And our kids aren't always capable of doing that. They're not capable of regulating themselves on their own, and they really need us to help them. So connecting with them and not being afraid of stepping into those situations with them when they're that escalated. And of course, right, deep breathing is so huge. We've learned to do it for ourselves, but we literally have found that even with young children that they have found that just by making eye contact and breathing deeply can affect their breathing. We don't even realize that we're doing that. But that's that part of that co-regulating where they need us to come alongside them wherever they are and then walk them back through the steps. So enforcing any limits, of course, is important because we have to be dependable with them. All right, I'm going to kind of fly through some of this because we're getting close on time, but when we get to this point with intimidation, where you feel threatened or they're threatening some of the other kids, then that definitely is a time to get help. This doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean they're not going to respect you. It means that they see that there is a whole supportive team, and that intimidation is not tolerated at all. We don't shame them. We're not punishing them, but we don't tolerate it. So definitely getting help. And really, if you get to the refusal phase, where if we ask a student to come out in the hall and they say no, or they communicate no, they're not going to do it, I would say at that point, that's where you really want to get some assistance and make sure that you've got backup to keep it from getting to that point of intimidation. Wait for your team, you know, avoid intervention. We want to back up and not be threatening them back. And then of course, tension reduction. And this is where I said before, is after kind of the blow ups, after the acting out situations, this is a great way for us to teach our kids how to resolve conflict. A lot of our kids cannot handle the emotional pain of breaking a relationship with someone they care about. So many of our kids will say, I didn't mean to do that. I don't want to be that way. I didn't want to hurt you, because they do care about you. And so they will avoid it. And many of our kids who've been through trauma will, a lot of the people who are around them will often talk about a kid who has a blow up and who says the most hurtful things and has punched a hole in the wall and ripped up their sister's teddy bear, in 2 minutes later will act like it's fine. And that's infuriating to the rest of the people around them, that they're not showing any remorse, they're not showing that they care, that they regret it. But remorse is really painful acceptance of our own faults and failures, and our kids are so focused on avoiding any more pain that they'll often do this. So this phase of things is such a great opportunity. So when our kids go through these times, you know, can we mentally say to ourselves, oh yay, another opportunity to show them support and walk them through resolving conflict and restoring relationships. That is such a beautiful thing. How do we restore relationships? And if we can teach our kids how to do that, gosh, how powerful is that for the rest of their lives, for coworkers and for spouses and neighbors and whatever. So this is that whole establishing therapeutic rapport means that we want them to respect us and we want to respect them. So we're not going to go, you know, we're not going to bring up the situation in a way that tries to make them feel guilty for it, but we do want to talk about it, and talk about it in a way that's not taboo. So what happened and how did you respond and what could you have done differently? So we're engaging with them to talk about a situation that they would like to avoid, but that they're feeling support from us, that it's okay to actually be vulnerable with me, you're safe with me. So it's a great opportunity. We don't want to give them the cold shoulder, right? I'm not talking to you for the rest of the night. That's our instinct. So we have to kind of fight against that. Empathetic listening, this is not a new concept either, but it's something I think is helpful to just keep in the forefront of our minds with them, because if our kids feel heard, they will feel supported. So being non-judgmental, giving them our undivided attention. This isn't always necessarily, you can't do it necessarily in the middle of a class, but at an opportunity where you do intentionally reconnect with them so they know that you guys are okay, it can be really powerful. And when we're talking to our kids, this is a big one. They're gonna avoid answering some of those questions like, what happened? And what do you think you could have done in that situation differently? And we need to be okay to wait because a lot of times if they just don't say anything, what our instinct is to jump in and maybe try to answer for them or sense that they're uncomfortable and move on. So being okay with quiet and waiting and supportive, not in a way that's pressure, but we're not rushing them, pushing them, and forcing them. They're going to come and talk about these things as they feel safe to do it. So we want to give them that opportunity. And it's a win. It's a win if they can do it. So it's worth the wait, and we want to set them up for success. However, whatever situations we can to manipulate the circumstances around them so that they get a successful experience, because experiences really do affect the brain. So any positive experiences that they get, you're healing parts of the brain that have been hurt. Of course, this is just empathetic listening standards that I hear you saying. So we repeat back to them, is this what you mean? You felt this way? So that we're letting them clearly hear from us that we are listening to them and that they could get a chance to clarify. And what's really cool about this practice in listening is often if we hear back someone say what we've said, sometimes we're a little bit more capable of going, oh yeah, that sounded ridiculous. Oh, I can see now how I'm being completely, irrational. But when it comes out of our mouth, it makes sense. But when we hear it come back to us, sometimes we go, oh yeah, I can see how that, sometimes it gives them the opportunity to do that. And that's just basic listening skills that are helpful. Again, we're always looking for fear-driven behaviors, anxiety-driven behaviors. We're looking for the anxiety or the fear, that's behind the behavior. So many of the things, even in our personal family that we dealt with my daughter, I feel like we've got to address the lying, we've got to address the hitting, we've got to address the screaming, we have to address, but it wasn't that. And of course, that's what I felt at the time. But as we learned what she needed, and we learned the fear and the anxiety and the inner turmoil that she was carrying, when we were able to treat that and help her with that, all those behaviors disappeared. They disappeared. I mean, I used to get stuff flying in the van, shoes and cheeseburgers and anything that was, could be thrown would get thrown. And I used to think, how are we going to deal with this? We're going to turn her car seat around? But the stuff stopped flying once we got to the hard issue. So a lot of those behaviors, they're not really the issue. It's the fear and the anxiety that's behind them. So that is a real quick overview of the phases, except for the acting out, which I kind of will address a little bit, but I'm not sure we spend a ton of time on this, and I'll let you guys decide if you want to really dig into this at all. But as far as if things escalate to that point where you feel like they're in a danger of hurting themselves or others, is that something that you really want to talk about at all tonight, or maybe push that back until we get back into in-person where that becomes a issue anyway?
The other ladies might have, or Joe, have some other thoughts, but I feel like maybe if we wait till a little closer to when we're in person so that it's more fresh, might be useful.
Okay.
I don't think they have anything to say.
Yeah, I'll open it up to some feedback from you all, but I'll just reiterate too, so much of this stuff, right, doesn't it feel like, well, this is just common sense and none of this is really all that elaborate. These are things that we learn are helpful in relationships, especially as we get older. So part of I think it's important just to I mean, I have to remind myself all the time, I love to interrupt and just, I know what you're going to say, so let's just move on. I'm really good at that. So these kinds of reminders, I think, are just really good to be aware of. But our kids are, they're really amazing. And there's a lot they can control. There's just a lot of ways that they've learned to gain control that are not healthy. And so a lot of what we're doing is we want to teach them healthy ways to deal with anxiety, healthy ways to deal with conflict, because, not only are they interacting with us, but they're going to be eventually interacting with each other. Boy, do they all love to trigger each other.
Like a crying baby, right? When one starts crying, the other ones start crying. So
yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I'd love to open it up to just, talking about, if things that you have found that are helpful for situations where someone, is getting worked up. I think that's kind of, one of the expressions I think we use in our family, that are helpful to counteract that. I love the humor suggestion. That's such a powerful tool. Playful, silly.
Well, I've been in situations where we've done all the things you talked about. We've had to clear classrooms out, where we've had to take the person out. So I just agree with what you said. It depends on the situation. What's going to be the quickest and less disruptive.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like removing the audience has helped with calming things down?
Yeah. And it usually is a person that can just be with them one-on-one. And it might just be sitting there and letting them stew for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Just being in there.
Yeah, that's a great word, stewing.
Not trying to bring out any information, but just letting them calm down.
Mm-hmm.
But just being present.
Yeah. Yeah, I love how Karyn Purvis changes the verbiage from a timeout to a time in.
I just think back to some of the times we've had situations arise that it's usually easier when you get one-on-one with them and kind of at their level, and then you just listen, don't react in most cases, and just kind of try to understand where they're coming from, and then active listen, repeating it back to them so they know that you're listening, that you are in fact, paying attention to them, and sometimes just going for a walk outside of wherever that particular space is, because what we found a lot of times is it's the surroundings that is causing the fit rather than the subject matter of what's going on. It's more they're overwhelmed with some situation. So removing them from that situation and just getting fresh air or walk around is generally something that solves a lot of this.
Yeah. Air is a big thing for the brain, and the change of the environment. A lot of times it's detective work, right? I got to try to figure out what either is triggering this or figure out how I can connect with them or redirect them. So I think sometimes, sometimes they're hangry, right? Really, sometimes, a protein bar might make all the difference in the world. So it could be things like that where there are extenuating circumstances where we can figure something out that's going to help them. And two, we're becoming the giver of good things. We're becoming a positive thing in their life where they're feeling that care and support, even in physical ways like that too. Yeah. I love that word, hangry.
I do too. I say it about myself a lot. I liked how you tied the being humorous that Heather said into that also shows them that you don't have your walls up or a guard up, makes you more personable. When I was in the group homes working with the kids, the more on their level and personable I was versus some other people I saw interact with them that showed that they were authority and they wanted to make sure they were authority. Their reactions to them weren't as pleasurable as they were with me because I was more approachable and interactive with them.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge.
Yeah. I was listening to a speaker a couple of days ago about trauma in schools. And he talked about dad jokes and how huge dad jokes have been for him to work with kids, where he'll tell a dumb dad joke and he's like, I don't even know why I needed a PhD. I just needed to learn all these dad jokes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions or anything to say? No?
Well, I remember the first time I took this course, I thought, why in the world did I just pay $4,000? Because again, this course is where you learn the restraints and you get the physical, you have to go through the test, the physical test and the written test, and they certify you, and it gives you like this legal protection. And I remember thinking, this is all just common sense stuff, but being aware of it and interacting and identifying it, to me, is really helpful. So I hope that this is helpful in some ways, not necessarily that it's new, but just for us to kind of talk about these things and how important they are. Because I know I take it personal. You know, it's my first instinct is, you know, it's all about me.
Without a doubt. And I also think, like, while you mentioned that it's potentially common sense, and that's not always, and you mentioned this earlier too, our first instinct to react this way. So talking about it and reviewing it and having it reinforced in the back of our mind when the time comes up is really important. And while you were talking, I was thinking that maybe when we have our own space and we're teaching classes and not like at an agency where staff are, that maybe we even have 3 people just in case. you don't want something to, you know, what if there's a very irate child, or a child that becomes irate, I mean, and maybe they're a bigger child, and, you know, you never know.
Yeah. Yeah. I do love the establishing rapport with them, because I think that it may be in the beginning 3 people would be important, but I think eventually you get to a place where you have established rapport with them. They do begin to trust these kids, even though they've been hurt so much. They still long to trust. They long for relationships. They'll fight them, but I mean, we were created to have them. So
I agree.
establishing that with them, and really, yeah, a few weeks in, you kind of know, you know, you kind of get some idea of if this might be a potential problem. And it's really rare. It really is. I mean, our family camps that our nonprofit runs, we had the families that were desperate and were on the verge of dissolving their adoptions, and things like turning custody over to the state. I mean, pretty extreme things. Our kids had either tried to kill an animal or a person, or had killed an animal. And within a day, we didn't really have to do the physical. We didn't have that physical stuff anymore, because once they begin to see you're dependable, you're calm, and you help me breathe, you know, they heal. They really do heal. So I'm excited to see rising here and growing, and I think it's really exciting.
Awesome. Thank you, Jennie.
Yeah, well, thanks for letting me chat with you guys and get to meet some of you, and we'll talk again soon.